and welcome to Look Down There, the show where we talk about all the things we don't talk about. I'm your host, Michelle Amore. Today, my guest is the founder and CEO of Sevah Consulting, which provides transitional support services to nonprofits. As a nonprofit leader, she has focused on girls' and women's equity and has served as the director of the Chicago Abortion Fund and the California Coalition for Reproductive Freedom, just to name a few. She is also the co-host of the I Am Speaking podcast. I'm so happy to have her here today. Please welcome Shailushi Ritche. Hi, Shailushi.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, thank you. A long awaited meeting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I'm so excited to have you on and talk about this stuff. But I will tell you, give you a disclaimer that I feel so angry about this topic that it's very hard for me to be articulate about it. And, you know, I've never really spoken about this publicly with someone before. And I've had a lot of personal conversations, but yeah, it's like, I just don't know what to do with my anger and how to make it productive. And I am someone who likes to use my anger in a productive way. But there's something about this where it's like, I just short circuit and I don't know where to go. So you have a lot of experience in the reproductive field and fighting for these rights. And I have a lot of questions for you, but
Sure.
The first I want to know is what drew you to this work specifically? Were you just looking to get into nonprofits, or were you like, no, reproductive rights is where I belong?
So I will say that when I was 8 or 9, very young, I wanted to become an OBG. I wanted to be an obstetrician gynecologist. And my family says that I have always had this fire about fairness. I don't like it when things are unfair. It just,
yes, I call it a justice fetish. This is what
Yes.
it is. It is that. Yes.
Yes. So those two things combined made me want to focus on helping young women and girls who were underprivileged and who didn't have the access and resources that people with privilege do, i.e. working with, girls in the inner city or in rural areas where they didn't have information to about reproductive health care or access to reproductive health care. So that's where it started. But in college, and my sister Kosha, which we both know, loves this story, where I was getting ready to apply to medical school. And then I went, I don't want to take the MCAT. That sounds hard. And then when I heard what you'd had to do, not only to apply to med school, but then when you're in med school and what kind of training you had to do after medical school, I was like, I don't want to do any of that. Can I just skip to being a doctor?
Yeah. So you're right. You don't like those marathons.
I don't.
You don't like that sprint.
I just want to do the work.
Yes.
Let's just go to the work.
Get me there fully formed.
Right. And so, and not surprisingly, most people tend to look down on practicing medical doctors who don't have any training.
Who knew?
Who knew?
Shame.
But in college, I also started taking philosophy courses and ended up adding my philosophy major to my biology major. And in my senior year, public health really emerged as my passion. And that does combine the fairness. How do you make sure that everyone is healthy? How do you make sure that you are addressing the kinds of, and that we're hearing a lot more about this nowadays, those social determinants of health, what's in our built environment, how much access to food do we have, how much access to clean water, clean air, clean soil, clean food, all of those things on the population level, so that everyone's as healthy as possible, with my real desire to address health issues. So that's where, that was that thread that got me into doing reproductive rights, health, and equity work. And then it just I built on that after college. I got my master's in public health from the University of Michigan, and always stayed involved. I worked at Planned Parenthood for 3.5 years while I was in college, and then stayed involved in women and girls' gender equity issues generally. And so that's how I ended up being, what I would call a reproductive equity advocate.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Planned Parenthood, and I went to them probably for 5 years or so. It was the only way that I could get my yearly pap smear and to get my birth control. And there was so much stigma surrounding Planned Parenthood. And I know that we've talked about this personally, but I was raised born again Christian. So I had a lot of my own like stigmas and shame that I had to release. And, I remember the first time that I went to a Planned Parenthood and confronting that shame and like the amount that I had judged people in the past just kind of smacked me in the face. So that's always been something challenging for me, is just like releasing the old, I guess, right? Like we're taught abortion is wrong and enjoying sex is wrong. And, I remember writing papers, 5-paragraph essays in school about why abortion was wrong. And I just look back and I hit my head and like, oh my God, like I can't believe I bought that. But I'm grateful that I woke up, but I feel we need a lot more people to wake up.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot to unpack in what you just said. The first thing is we are so good at making judgments when we haven't been in a situation that would require us to make that kind of decision. I have my own judgments about various things. I remember one of the things that I learned in graduate school about, what kind of people get abortions. It's not who you think it is. In fact, it's not the poor girl of color from, an impoverished neighborhood who's using it as quote unquote birth control.
Yeah, that's a ridiculous argument. Right. Oh my God. Yeah.
The average person, or the demographic profile of a woman seeking an abortion, is a white woman, usually married, in her mid to late 30s, early 40s. So we're talking about a woman who has, had sex within marriage, already has 2 children, and finds herself unexpectedly pregnant. And for any number of reasons that she and her partner, or the pregnant person and their partner, let me just even rephrase that and say the pregnant person and that person's partner decide that they cannot care for this child in their current situation. So that's one thing, like just flipping the script and saying, hey, who are we judging? Because we have ideas in our heads. And then we think, oh, that's who we're judging. And that's who we're trying to prevent from doing something that we disagree with. The second thing is, again, it's so hard to figure out what we would do in a certain situation unless we are actually in that situation. And so, that's another layer we put on it. And the third thing, and this is a thing that always kind of, we talk about having a justice fetish. I don't disagree with people's right to believe that life starts at birth or conception, right? I don't disagree with people's right to believe that abortion is wrong. That's a personal opinion. That's a personal belief, right? What I do really disagree with is the right to legislate one group's opinion and have it apply to everybody. Mm-hmm. Not everyone thinks that life starts at conception. Not everyone thinks that abortion is wrong. And that is the issue for me, which is it's not fair that I have to live by a set of rules that I don't buy into. Mm-hmm. And those same people would not agree to buy into a set of rules that I would propose because it goes against what they believe. I respect that. I just don't want to have, legislated policy based on one group's opinions.
Right. And that group is a group who can't relate. It's a bunch of white men, right, who have no idea what it's like to be a woman in this world, in this patriarchy, in this patriarchal soup that we're all living in. And one of the things that I think breaks my heart the most is that women buy into their lesser value because the message of the patriarchy is so strong and it comes from so many different angles and it's so sneaky, so subversive, so subtle. And, we start to believe it that, yes, we can't make our own decisions. You must make the decision for us, even though how can they make this decision? I'm sure you saw this, the press secretary who just shut down that journalist.
Yes.
Like, oh, you wouldn't actually know what it feels like to be in this situation. Next.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very fascinating how women, particularly white women, buy into white supremacy and the control of women's bodies. And I think a lot of that has to do with privilege and power as well, right? So one of the most interesting things I've read about the current anti-abortion movement is that it really has a nexus with the anti-civil rights movement in the 60s. So when that was starting to wane, leaders of that movement, the anti-civil rights movement, were like, what are we going to do next? And they kind of talked about a various, number of things. And they landed on abortion as a way to bring together the xenophobic, thread that runs through this country and the racist thread that runs through this country with the ability to mobilize religious groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because in the 50s and 60s, Catholics, for example, but the majority of Catholics did not believe that life starts at conception. There's this idea of the quickening, and a lot of religious traditions have that sense, which is like you get to like 10 or 11 weeks and you can start to feel something happening inside you. That is when, people have typically thought, okay, now you're pregnant. Before that, and this we're talking in the modern era, right? I mean, we're not talking about far in the past where it was like, I can't take care of this baby. I'm going to put them out on a rock in the middle of a field.
Right.
Infanticide and late term pregnancy abortions were de rigueur of the time in a different era. But in the modern era, it's basically 12 weeks. Most people say 12 weeks before you're sort of like, you really have a child, a differently living being. Although, the science doesn't say that, but that's kind of been the marker. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing now is the slow chipping away of rights in like any one of these things together or apart would not be problematic necessarily, right? A 3-day waiting period, required viewing of the ultrasound, a required transvaginal ultrasound, all of these things required listening to the heartbeat. All of these things are they're oppressive, but not restrictive until you start to take them all together, right? So I'm opposed to all of those. I want to be really, really clear. But if I could get an abortion and what I had to do was listen to my baby's heartbeat or listen to the heartbeat, and that would be it, I think I wouldn't love that, but I'd be like, okay, it's that you have to do that. And then you have to have an ultrasound. And then you also have to have a 3-day waiting period. And this is where Texas is where we end up with all of the ands.
Yeah. I mean, 6 weeks, most women don't even know that they're pregnant at 6 weeks, right?
No.
Like, it's just not how that works. And it's just so scary because what is going to happen is that people are still going to get abortions. This isn't going to stop abortions, but they're going to get it in ways that aren't healthy for them, for the mother.
Yeah.
And so then what happens? Like, if we care about life so much, why aren't we caring about the person who is creating and harboring this life?
Yeah. I completely agree with you on that statement. And when we look at it, it's really clear that we don't actually care about life. That's a lot of, that's
we care about
PR.
votes. We care about votes and money and power. And this is a way to funnel that. Yeah.
And controlling women's bodies. Mm-hmm. So we care about controlling women's bodies and telling them, exactly how they need to act when they find that they are pregnant.
Right.
And this is largely women. I realize that in the modern, in the current day, we're not talking about women. We're talking about people who can get pregnant, but it's really born, the roots are in women and the patriarchy and white supremacy, and controlling how women can and cannot act.
Right.
So it's really something else right now. Yeah. I think one of the things that was most interesting to me, and I think a lot of people who have worked in the field for a long time, is how shocked and surprised people were that this is happening in Texas. And for those of us who have been doing this work for, the better part of 20 or even longer years, this has been happening in little ways all over the place. Like I said, there's this, there's that, there's a third thing. Other states have tried this before. The difference is, I think, that previously the state was trying to enforce the penalty. And in this case, Texas has then shifted its responsibility away from the state and onto individual citizens.
Yeah, which is terrifying. Oh my God. Like that, the bounty and turning people in. Oh my God. What a mess. And people who are, maybe just looking to make a buck, right? Like it may not even be true and causing all these issues. And there's a phrase that the governor said that they're going to work really hard to eradicate rape.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh yeah, great. We should, but how? What's your plan? What is your plan here? And why are the pregnant people being vilified and blamed for that? Like this is a victim blaming culture.
Oh, absolutely.
So how do we turn that boat around?
Well, that's a great question, because the turning of the boat, I think we've all tried to figure out how to do that. I do remember a couple of years ago, 5 years ago, when our former president was campaigning and then got elected. And I remember thinking, maybe this is what this country needs. It's traumatic. It was traumatic for many people. And certainly was, I would say, not a highlight in our country's history. Dark 4 years.
Yes.
But seeing that streak of American mindset on full-blown, glorified display with all the lights, I think people got really motivated to push back. Mm-hmm. It was a wake-up call. And I have a almost 14-year-old, and I saw my kids' generation like lose their minds, because this is completely anathema to what they represent, what my kid and their friends represent. So it was like, oh my God, we can't let this happen ever again. I think that this Texas law and the fact that other states are trying to replicate it, and they replicate it and also create additional barriers. So the governor of South Dakota issued an executive order. Now, I don't know how well those can stick, right? But issued an executive order that nobody could get a medication abortion either. So, like I said, I don't know how that's going to stick because it's by executive order, not through the legislature. But you just see, it's like, it's like just the room is closing in slowly, slowly, slowly. And if one thing sticks and we're going to try something else, it's a lot of trial and error to see what sticks. And things are sticking. I think one thing that really, really scares me when you go back to talk about this, bounty being placed on people who would aid and abet in any way to women seeking procedures in Texas, or people seeking procedures in Texas, is that we have known for a while, and my work straddles both reproductive equity, but also domestic violence work as well. Mm-hmm. So we have known for a while that birth control and forced pregnancy is a strategy that abusers use with their partners. So they will either withhold birth control, poke holes in condoms, for example, threaten to withhold birth control, or threaten to report someone that's pregnant, or threaten to hurt a baby, or right. So this is yet another tool for abusers to, control their victims. There's the survivors to be like, if you don't do this, I'm going to report you, or I'm going to force you to have an abortion, and then I'm going to report you. Like, there are so many different ways where reproductive health and intimate partner violence come together. And that is another layer of scary, because it's one thing to be like, okay, this is super scary, this is awful. But when your partner is actively working against you, you are caught between the state and your partner. That's a rock and a hard place. That's miserable.
Yeah.
You can't win either way. There's no way to be safe in that situation.
Yeah. And that's a good point. And I didn't think about that aspect of it. And I'm wondering who is in the room when these decisions are being made, and are any of these points brought up? Does anybody care about these things? Are they able to, just have compassion, like general compassion? And, I would imagine in a case like what you're describing, maybe they would feel like, well, it's her fault for being with him, or whatever, whatever the case is.
Well, those people are the same people that say, why doesn't she, and sometimes he, but why doesn't she just leave?
Right. Right. But it's not easy. It's when you're in that situation, the amount of fear of your life, it's like survival versus empowerment. Like how do you navigate that when maybe the person you're with has demonstrated that they will go to any length to keep you in your place, whatever that is?
Absolutely. And the research shows that when usually the woman is trying to leave that relationship, that is the most dangerous time for her kids, and her pets. So the abusing partner will threaten harm to children and pets to keep that person there, but will actually harm children and pets if that person tries to leave.
Yeah.
So it's not safe on either side of it. I think the other thing is, when we talk about personal responsibility, which all these bills are based on, all of this approach is based on, it overlooks or actively ignores, probably more likely, the fact that coercion is a part of many relationships. And so people don't always have the option to say no to a sexual encounter.
Right.
right? If
Right.
I can imagine a situation in which, I'm a woman, I'm in a relationship like that. I know I'm at my most, I'm in that ovulation period where I could get pregnant, and my partner wants to engage in intercourse. I don't have the option to say no. I don't get to say, please wear a condom. I don't get to take birth control.
Wow. Wow. So what do we do? Like, I mean, my blood is boiling. I'm kind of shaking a little bit. I'm hot and I'm sweaty, talking about this. What, what is it that we can do in this moment? Because this thing that happened in Texas
Mm-hmm.
is the tip of the iceberg, right?
Yeah.
There's more on its way, especially when you look at the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
So what can we do? What can we do to turn our anger into something productive?
So the number one thing that anyone can do if they're feeling really motivated to push back is like the immediate thing that you can do is donate to an abortion fund. Almost every state has one, but every area has several. Whether you live in the Northwest, whether you live in Texas, I know Texas has at least two. I think there's three. And Texas is a huge state, right? So it's like one on the east side, one in the south, and then one sort of toward the west. But if you want to know, or your listeners would like to know, where they can donate locally, they should go to the National Network of Abortion Funds. So the website is nnaf.org. And
nnaf.org. Thank you.
yeah, sure. So the National Network of Abortion Funds has a listing of all the abortion funds across the country. I think maybe even some internationally, but definitely in the US. And so all of the people who work for abortion funds, the Chicago Abortion Fund also included, are still actively working on helping people seeking abortions to get them. And even though Texas has by and far the most restrictive law, at least in Illinois, we are the only state around here that goes past, 18 weeks. So we are a hub. We are a well for abortion access in a way that other states in the Midwest are not. One also very interesting thing about Illinois is several years ago, the staff from the Chicago Abortion Fund and other reproductive rights organizations basically passed a law in Illinois that would keep Roe v. Wade protections in place, even if it was rolled back at the national level. So I would also suggest to all of us that that is a model that we can advocate for at both the state level and the national level. And a resource for that kind of work is the organization is called If, When, How, Lawyering for Reproductive Justice. Now I'm excited. I love giving shout outs to these organizations because these people are all my colleagues and friends. They're amazing. And many of them have been doing this work their whole lives. So they know stuff inside and outside and upside down. But both of these organizations are doing fantastic work to address policy level work and then the real day-to-day logistics of people who need abortion care.
Mm-hmm. I think the work that you're doing and all of your colleagues' work is just incredible. And it's tireless, it's endless, and oftentimes thankless work. And I am in total awe. Like your passion for it is very clear to me. But I want to ask, how do you maintain hope in this? When you're working so hard and fighting so hard and you're getting more and more obstacles thrown in your way, what is it that keeps you going? What is the what is the future that keeps you coming back?
There are two things that I try and remember. One is that Martin Luther King Jr., when he was doing his work for racial equity, I don't think he ever thought that he was going to see it, be perfect in his lifetime. Mm-hmm. But this idea that the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice sticks with me. Right? Sometimes it doesn't look like it's going that way, but I think to hold on to that as a source of hope that, it's going to get there one day. And the other thing I try to think about is that this work, we talked about at the beginning, like, oh, it's not a marathon. I'm not really a long-term person. But in this way I am, which is, we have a chance to carry the baton and take it as far as we can take it. And then we hand it off to someone else. Mm-hmm. And there's a quote, which I'm absolutely going to get wrong, so I'll try and find it for you. But it's something to the effect of just because, you're not going to complete the work, but just because you can't complete the work doesn't allow you to not do it. You're still obligated to do the work, even though you're not going to be able to finish it. Mm-hmm. And so I think about those two things, which is the idea of the arc of the universe bending toward justice. But secondly, we don't get there. We don't bend it toward justice unless we all do as what we can do. And sometimes that means taking a break. Sometimes that means my contribution this month is to give a $10 donation. Sometimes it means writing letters. Sometimes it means showing up at protests. All of those things are a way of doing our piece of the work. And that we do it because it's the right thing to do, not because we're looking for an outcome, right?
Yeah.
I think this is so similar to a lot of the work done on racial equity or on gender equity or gender identity equity, right? Where it's, sexuality equity, where you talk about, 50, 60 years ago, it was okay. Yeah, it's not even 50, 60 years ago, but fairly quite recently that it was okay to discriminate against someone because they were gay or a lesbian. That's, for the most part, that's not okay. I know there are little pockets where it is still okay, but the public opinion has shifted against that. That's not okay anymore. It's not okay generally to misgender people. And again, I know there are pockets where people feel differently about that, but public opinion is shifting.
Yeah.
And we all do our work to help public opinion shift.
And that's because of all the work that's happened before our time. And that's such a beautiful sentiment, that the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice.
Yeah.
I mean, it's beautiful. But to be able to continue to do the work that you may not see the finished product, whatever that finished product is, because it's never finished. There's always more to learn. There's always more growth to be had. But in a way, before talking to you, I had this thought wow, it must be really unfulfilling, must be really frustrating, but I don't feel that way anymore. I feel, you're doing something that propels the next thought and the next idea and the next equitable line. And I mean, you're doing it, you're doing the work. And it's inspiring.
Thank you.
But what are some highlights where you have felt that success? A moment of breath, okay, I was able to do that, and that's going to fuel me on to the next.
Sure. This kind of work sometimes requires you to get really micro-focused. So the year I was with the Abortion Fund as their interim executive director, we had a handful of pretty intense cases come across our resource, our hotline. One of them in particular was a 14-year-old girl from West Virginia who was 28 weeks pregnant.
Oh my gosh.
And finally, was able to get the help that she needed, and that required. So for your listeners, a 28-week termination is a full-blown medical procedure. It is not the kind of 6, 8, 10-week abortion that happens almost as an outpatient procedure. You go in,
is that you're more like the induction. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, what happens in clinics usually is D&C, dilation curettage. That's pretty standard. You can go home. You might have some cramping. It might be painful, but it's pretty safe. And you'll go home the next day and, you'll be fine. You'll go home that day and you'll be fine the next day, usually. At 28 weeks, you have to go to the hospital. It's a medical procedure. It's surgery. So that's when it is dilation, and it's an induction with a, sort of a termination in the middle of the induction. So that I'm not 100% sure how they did it, right? I'm not a medical professional, just put it out there. But it's a much more complicated procedure than what you get at 10 weeks. It requires a hospital stay. Imagine paying for your own gallbladder surgery. That is what you're talking about. I got to check myself into the hospital, got to pay for my surgery. I have to pay for, all the meds I get. You have to pay for everything. It's all out of pocket. We can't imagine paying out of pocket for a gallbladder surgery. Like, people would just be dying of gallbladder problems then, because it's so expensive to go to have really any inpatient medical care or any medical care period.
Yeah.
But then if you're 15 and you have to fly across the country, I think they ended up having to go to New Mexico and paying for your, then you're there, you're there for days. It's very traumatic. And to force people to go through that trauma on top of the other trauma is cruel. To force people to have children is also cruel. And the joy there, the wins there, the little fuel that you get is to be able to help someone in that kind of situation. Mm-hmm. And we get notes back from people. Thank you so much. This procedure saved my life. I was in an abusive relationship and I just knew I couldn't have this child, or I was just starting school and I just knew I couldn't support a child. Any number of things. I'm on medication that would cause all kinds of fetal abnormalities. I couldn't have this baby. The fact that there's so much gratitude on the other side. Mm-hmm. It is the fuel. Yeah. That's the only place that you can get some real joy from the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's not that you're ending an unborn child's life, but you're saving a life. This is life-saving work. And those moments, that success, right? And mm-hmm. we all have different ideas of what success is. I think the overarching idea is money, fame, all, cars, whatever, all material things. But I have come to learn that success is really about these moments that you're sharing with another human.
Yeah.
And that you're making a difference and you're making an impact, and that gets paid forward. That's
absolutely.
Success. Yeah.
And it's such a joy to be able to show someone kindness when the rest of the world is just being harsh.
Yes.
when everything is hard, when everything feels challenging, to have someone extend a hand and say, no, we can help you. I can help you. Mm-hmm. I've been in that situation about something not nearly as, challenging as this, but when someone steps in and you don't expect that help, that is amazing. And that is the joy in the work.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being here and for sharing all of your stories and your passion and inspiration with us today.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure.
Yes. I will ask you one final question. I see that you're into mixology. What are you mixing? What are the drinks that are keeping you going?
I love daiquiris, not the frothy frozen ones, but like a real
stuff.
Right. So I've been working on those, and I have almost got it down, particularly the Hemingway daiquiri, which has maraschino liqueur in it, some grapefruit. And then turns out I'm pretty allergic to gin. I don't know what it is about gin, but it just doesn't sit well with me. But my sister is super into Negronis. And so I've been experimenting with alternate liqueur Negronis. So vodka or mezcal.
Tequila, yeah.
Tequila, yeah. So trying to figure out where do I want to take that? And also thinking about what kind of blending could I do so that I really find the thing I like.
Yeah. So was this your pandemic activity?
It was. A lot of people were baking bread, and I was like, I'm going to learn to bartend.
Yeah, I'm making drinks. See ya. Enjoy your bread.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and as it turns out, you can only drink so many rosés before you're like, this is kind of boring. Right. So let's try something else.
Yeah, right. I like it. It's a good skill, good life skill.
Absolutely.
Yes. All right. Well, tell me about where people can find out more about you and also about your podcast.
Sure. So one of the more interesting things about me, and I've said this before, is that not on this podcast, obviously, but in various places, is that my first name, Shailushi, is very unique. And so if you Google that, just my first name, I'm the only person that shows up for pages and pages and pages. So that's probably the easiest way people can find me.
So it's a superpower. Your name is a superpower.
And a super liability.
Oh, okay.
And just as we're talking about this and closing out this conversation, when I took the role at the Chicago Abortion Fund, I spent a lot of time thinking about whether I was ready for that kind of notoriety. That there is a lot of animosity toward pro-choice advocates and people doing that work. And I had to really think about whether I was ready to take that kind of risk with my safety. Particularly because my name does stand out. I'm not a Jane. So there's no anonymity in stepping into that space. Obviously I did because I care more about the work than, dealing with online trolls and everything, but it's part of it. My website is, my work website is www.sevah, that's SEVAH, consulting.com. So that's where all my professional stuff lives. And then my sister and I run a podcast called I Am Speaking, and that is on Podbean. So I think that's I Am Speaking podcast. /podbean.com.
It's on Instagram, right? Instagram is I Am Speaking.
Yeah.
What's the handle? I Am Speaking Podcast?
I Am Speaking Podcast, yeah.
Okay, yes. Which I was so grateful to be a guest on your show. It was so fun.
Such a great conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we have connected, and thank you so much for doing this show.
Would you mind if I just left your listeners with one last quote? Because remember, I had mentioned that quote before, and I was like,
yes, please.
So I found it. It's actually it's from the Talmud. And the quote is, "Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work. but neither are you free to abandon it.
Mm.
And every time I read that, I get goosebumps because I think, what can we do now? We can't finish the work, but we can move it forward.
Oh, that is beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And please do send that to me.
I will. Thank you.
I need to put that up on my wall somewhere. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
Okay, everybody, it's time to spread your legs and spread the love, like and share and follow and subscribe. Definitely follow at I Am Speaking Podcast, and you can follow us at I Look Down There or me at Michelle Lamore. And remember that confidence comes from the bottom up. So grab a mirror and look down there. Until next time.